Hey guys, do you wish that you had more energy and enthusiasm for yourself and your kids? Are you in a rut? Do you spend all day caring for your little ones but feel run down and exhausted?
Holistic Hilda has a health for the long haul course that she says is 42HH, like 75 hard, but more fun and shorter, which sounds good to me. It's a 6-week program that is designed to help you set and reach your health and wellness goals, get rid of brain fog, boost your mood, lose weight, sleep like a baby, but in a good way. These are the results others have enjoyed from her Health for the Long Haul course.
If you want to learn more about her 6-week course and her ongoing Holistic Hub community, check out her website, holistichilda.com. That is HOLISTICHILDA.com. Tap into ancient secrets for energy and vitality with none other than Holistic Hilda herself.
Hilda Labrada Gore, aka Holistic Hilda, is kind of a Dora the Explorer, uncovering ancient health traditions to restore energy and vitality. In recent years, she has been to Mongolia, Ethiopia, Ecuador, Kenya, Australia, and Albania, and she shares all she learns on her Instagram account, Holistic Hilda, her Holistic Hilda YouTube channel, and on the Wise Traditions podcast, which has over 15 million downloads to date, that she hosts and produces on behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation. Hilda has energy to spare because she keeps her feet on the ground and her face to the sun.
Welcome to Modern Ancestral Mamas. We are Corey and Christine, two millennial moms on a mission to bring ancestral wisdom to modern motherhood. Hi, guys. This is a special bonus episode that we are going to be releasing this week. The Maha movement is at the top of everybody's minds right now, especially with RFK's pending confirmation. And so Corey and I thought that we could sit down with a very special guest who was actually there and witnessed the entire hearing. So for today, we are bringing on our wonderful friend, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Thanks for having me, you all. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on with us like last minute.
Yeah,
That
that's great.
is exactly how I ended up at the hearing. Do you want to hear the story?
100%. Go for it.
Okay. So I've been hosting and producing the Wise Traditions podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation for like over 10 years, or we're in year 10 right now. And so I've made a lot of friends in this movement of ancestral health and just really helping our kids live their healthiest lives and changing our own health trajectory. Anyway, so I'm friends with Vani Hari, who's known as the Food Babe. And of course, I've interviewed her and Ginny Urich of 1,000 Hours Outside. And, I've got these mama friends who are in this movement, maybe even deeper than me, Zen Honeycutt from Moms Across America. Anyway, I knew Vani and Zen actually were coming to town for the hearing. So I texted Vani. I was like, hey, are you coming? She's like, yeah. Do you want to do dinner? And this was the night before the hearing. And I was like, sure. In the meantime, I rushed over to my daughter's house, like, lend me something to wear. I'm going out to dinner with Vani. And I was a mess. I was a mess. One of those days when you go to the grocery store and you like see a friend and you don't want them to see you, is that kind of situation. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't, even though Vani and our friends are like, I'm not going to show up like this. So anyway, I went to my daughter's house. She lives close by. I changed my clothes. Anyway, I met Vani. And while we were there, I'm sure she wouldn't mind if I told you, and I won't mention any names, but someone texted her and said, we want 15 moms right behind Kennedy's family. We have 15 seats and we want to fill them with moms. So right away, Vani's like, who do you know, Hilda? Who can we get? And I was like, oh my gosh, all my crunchy friends live in other places. But I did find a good friend of mine who just had a baby like 8 months ago. And anyway, I tried to recruit people, and so did Vani and so did Zen. And we were all kind of putting our heads together. But I thought, look at this movement. It's not just symbolic that they wanted to get moms there. I know that moms have been at the fore of we want better by our kids, right? So it was so beautiful to get this last minute invitation. If Vani had not been contacted while we were having dinner, I wouldn't have shown up because I just thought I heard you had to get there like at 4 a.m. And, I love my sleep. I was like, I'm not going to show up at that time. But here I was suddenly in the right moment at the right time. And she's like, come and you can be in that row. I have 4 kids after all, though they're kind of grown. And so anyway, that's the backstory. And so I just felt so privileged to be there. And I have more stories to tell, of course.
Okay, so
Wow.
man, I'm like mad that I moved away from that.
I know, that could have been you,
It
Corey.
totally could have been you.
All right. Well, since it wasn't me, and it was you, and you had cool people there. Um, so they had all these people sitting behind him,
Yes.
and
And let me even set the stage before that. So I arrived there. I had never met Ginny Urich in person, the 1,000 Hours Outside girl. But so we started this little text chat and I met her in person. She is as warm and as wonderful as you can imagine. And she was just so cute too, because she's like, I'm not a model. I'm just a regular mom. I'm like, hello, I'm not a model either. But
oh,
a lot of people there, I won't say a lot, but sometimes you look around, you're like, who are all these tall blondes with long locks of hair? I'm like, I do not fit in, but that's okay. I wore my hat because that's my signature and it gives me a little more height. And at first someone's like, you might need to take that hat off. I was like, over my dead body. I didn't say that actually, but it was very exciting, fun to meet Ginny. And then we were with some other people whose names I can't even remember. And there was this huge line already. And it was okay, it was early. The hearing was at 10. We were there, let's say, between 8:30 and 9. But I heard when they started letting us in because we had the reserved seats we got to cut in line, the line was starting to wrap around the Senate building.
no
And
way.
this
Wow.
tells you
That's a
how
big building.
important I know. This tells you how important that hearing was. And I have since heard too that some of the senators have said, we have never received so many calls in all of our years of confirming nominees to different appointments. So
I was
it
gonna say
it
that I tried to make phone calls today. I got through to 2 offices. I couldn't get through to any of the other ones because it just kept was as it was off the hook. They weren't
Mhm.
able to take any more phone calls, apparently.
Well, and so this is a grassroots movement, and I'm glad you're having me on your show because I want to remind the mom who's like, "Oh, I don't make a difference. I'm just raising my kids." Number one, that's the best thing you can do. Actually, is we don't need to have some politician make us healthy again. We can do this ourselves. But also, no matter where you are, you have someone that's representing you, and you can contact them at any time. And I have heard from numerous senators and representatives saying, especially I'm thinking of Congressman Thomas Massey, who I've interviewed on the Wise
Mm,
Traditions podcast. He said, one phone call, like, literally is much more important than you might ever think. It really can help
mhm.
sway a vote. So at the time of this recording, we don't know yet if Kennedy has gotten the confirmation or
Right.
not. But just know that you moms are a powerhouse and you are making a difference for the direction of this nation.
What have you seen this or that's been happening recently from the Maha movement with moms particularly? Like what have you experienced? Because, you have all your kids are older,
Hmm.
and so you're not like in the trenches,
Hmm.
but I know that you have all of these friends who are, doing this stuff. What have you seen that's different within the past, 2 years or so of this Maha movement happening?
Okay. So I'm going to be really honest with you because I always am, but I'll just say, um, I feel like a lot of the moms that I know that follow these kind of dietary guidelines of the wise traditions people, just to eat more whole real foods, avoid the seed oils, avoid the corn syrup, make the best choices you can and so forth. The people who are convinced that nutrient density matters and to eat more ancestrally, they've already opted out of the Kellogg's. They already know they don't want the seed oil. So the information that's kind of coming to the fore from Casey Means book Good Energy and from other people who are like movers and shakers right now isn't news to them.
Right.
But what I love about it, Corey and Christine, is that the people who are speaking up aren't just speaking up for their own kids, they're speaking up for the people who don't know. And I remember asking
Mhm.
Vani Hari on the Wise Virgins podcast, I'm like, why are you bothering? I already boycotted Kellogg's like 10, 15 years ago now, for
Mhm.
me. And she's like, it's because the people don't know. And it's true, they're very sick and they have no idea why. So
Mhm.
I love seeing the moms who are making the good choices for their own kids, but they're still in the trenches. They're still reaching out to their senators. They're still reaching out maybe on a more local level, but they're doing what they can to get the word out. And even I will say, especially because you guys have a podcast, sharing a podcast episode can be life changing. I know one woman who shared a podcast episode, and I think it was actually with one of the Means, Callie or Casey Means, and their family or their friend was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to lay off the seed oils." Like they had no idea.
Mm.
So the movement is gaining momentum. And again, I just want to reiterate that we don't have to wait for a politician to swoop in and save us. I don't
Mhm.
know if at this juncture again if Kennedy has been tapped or not for the position of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, but we all can take steps in the right direction. And we're all influencers in that way as well.
Mm, I love that. I'm dying to know. So you were there and you said that the lines wrapped out around the building. How many of those people were there in support of RFK and how many were there because they're so angry that this could be a potential um he could potentially be the HHS nominee and were there to, scream and heckle at him, which, like, I have seen part of it, so I know that there was one at least.
Yes.
Um, and I'm just curious, were there more, or do you feel like it was mostly positive?
From the feel in the room, and again, I was in the main room and it only held about, let's say, 50 to 100 people. Um, there was more support for Kennedy than people against him. There still was, a minority that was kind of clapping or, quietly endorsing, Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren's grilling of the candidate.
Mhm,
But mostly there was an overwhelming feeling of palpable love and positive energy going in Kennedy's direction. So that was beautiful. And there were two heckling people. But I'll tell you
mhm.
what I found out as kind of an insider now, really talking to some of the
Ooh.
people who really know how these things go. They said they always let in a couple of like people who were off kilter, and the two people who were hecklers were definitely saying vaccines save lives and things like that. They let them in because it's a little bit like in football when the coaches call a timeout right before the kicker is about to shoot for the field goal or try to get
Yes.
3 points or
Yes,
whatever. So it's called
exactly.
icing the kicker, right?
Yep,
So they were
yep.
doing that really to rattle Kennedy. And
Mm,
I took copious notes, and I don't know how much you guys want to go over it, but over and over again, it wasn't just those two hecklers, but it was senators trying to kind of get him off his game and trip him
mhm,
up. And I felt like you're not even listening to what Kennedy is proposing because they had their notes from their aides. By the way, senators aren't just talking extemporaneously. They've been in power
mhm.
too long. They know how it works. So they get the notes from the aides and they really
Yep.
stuck to their guns and what they wanted to say, no matter what Kennedy said. I remember one of the senators, as a matter of fact, was going on and on. She must have asked like literally like 7 questions and their time practically elapsed and Kennedy's like, can I answer one of them because time was almost up. So it was crazy, but at the same time I believe that when someone stands by their convictions and what really matters and they stand up for the truth, it can't be stopped. So people even in the crowd knew what
Mm,
was going on.
yeah. Um, can you share some of those notes? We'd love to hear what are some of your thoughts while you were there witnessing it. I mean, as somebody who only saw, bits and pieces of the hearing, my initial reaction was this was a full-on attack. There was very little it didn't feel very balanced as far as letting him respond well, letting him give his thoughts. Like he was just constantly being berated and uh, from what I saw, he was incredibly cool, very, very calm, and very articulate about everything still, despite the constant attacks.
Yes, yes. That's true. I think he was being attacked. And I think, unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of humility in the room. And honestly, at one point, you all, he called for that. He's like, can we just, I think I wrote this down here. He was like, can we just admit that we don't know everything? It was almost something along those lines. He was like, can we
Mm,
just say that we don't know and be humble enough to admit what we don't know? That
Mm.
that was not the place from which some of the people were speaking. And that's the thing. I sensed really truly, and you won't hear this on any from any other pundit. I don't think it's my own feeling. I sensed a fear from the senators that were attacking. And if you've ever heard
mhm.
some of these emotional studies, they say anger underneath it is fear, right?
Yes,
And so
yes.
I know that the senators are beholden to their constituents, but I felt like they were afraid to lose their right to vaccines, their right to choose abortion, all these different rights there. They didn't want any cuts in any agencies, like they want the status quo. And so they're
Mhm.
afraid that that's about to be toppled. But I thought if they would have had an ounce of the humility that Kennedy was calling for, they would have noticed that the US sweepingly went red, even some of their states. But they were like, I guess like a little kid trying to defend on King of the Hill, like, you're not going to knock me over, even though there's this groundswell, including the moms saying, we want better for our kids. Kennedy's opening statement was about the obesity, heart disease, and diabetes epidemic. He said, we deserve better. This is a chronic condition that is an existential threat to our country. And it was like the senators who were against him or were again holding on to the status quo had their fingers in their ears going, la, 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 la. They weren't listening at all because they kept asking him about his past record and, how do you deserve to be here? And maybe some of those questions are justified, but the spirit in which they were given to me clearly showed that they were afraid of losing their power. And it's like they couldn't even remember that he was a Democrat like less than 6 months ago, right? Like he was on their side, but suddenly they turned on him like wolves. It was crazy. It was crazy to witness. And that day, so I wear an Aura ring. Sometimes it's the one that measures your heart rate, your variability, and your sleep. And it said, you were stressed today. And I was like, oh, yes, yes, I was.
Oh my gosh.
It
Of
was a lot. I didn't even
course.
notice it at the time, but of course I was because all of this was happening and I'm watching. I was 10 feet from Bobby, and I know it's not
Wow.
easy because he has the vocal dysphonia. And again, I'm
Mhm.
speaking as a person to person thing, but he has trouble communicating in a way, but he has these strong, strong convictions. But I feel like they just weren't listening. I think they just saw him as a threat to their positions of power. And I don't know if, as some people say, they're bought off by pharma, but I do know they were very much antagonistic and not willing to consider that there might be something that they don't know and not willing to consider the horrible state we're in. By the way, this is one more thing I want to say that I've been ruminating on. Their reaction of focus in the hearing was on, like, we want to make sure there's health care and insurance and lower drug prices. And I thought, okay, fair enough. But what if we were so healthy we didn't need any of those things?
Mhm.
I was like, that's what they're missing. They're still in a
Mhm.
reactive mode. Healthcare to
Mhm.
them is, handing out the band-aids when everybody's all cut up instead of saying, let's get the glass off the playground.
I
Mhm.
actually heard a pundit talking about something, you know, about everybody gives big pharma a bad rep, but big pharma are the ones that are making all the pills that your parents take every day and you take every day and your children take every, and I'm like, not in my house. Like we don't. And I don't think that I realized up until recently how unusual it is to have an entire house full of people who are not constantly taking some sort of pharmaceutical, you
Corey,
know?
it's so unusual. I might have told you this story before, but I was in a dog park. This is probably about 5 years ago now. I know it was right before COVID, probably. And I was talking to this teacher, and she was like, oh my gosh, the kids in my classroom are all out of control. They're not on their meds. They're seeing counselors. They're depressed. And I said, well, what grade do you teach? And she said, second grade.
Oh,
Second grade.
geez.
I was like, "Are
Oh,
you freaking
no.
kidding me?" I know. And so that is the state of our country. But people think it's normal, you all. They think it's normal. "Oh, my kid has ADHD. Oh, my kid is always getting ear infections. Oh, my kid, has allergies, eczema." It's all very normal. It's only common. It's not normal. That's not what we were meant to live. And I think this is what Kennedy is trying to say. Can we look at what the root cause is? Can we stop
Mhm.
some of the current programs and put a pause on it? That's another thing. The senators were like, did you say you want to
Yep.
halt 8 years the research on infectious disease? Like, this is the worst thing that could have ever
Mhm.
happened. He said, we're
Totally.
spending so much on infectious disease and we're overlooking this chronic health conditions that are plaguing our country. But again, there was a status quo that they want to preserve, and I'm not quite sure why, but that was their take on it.
Honestly, even through the screen, the fear was palpable. It was to me, it felt so obvious. And I am conjecturing here, but it felt so obvious that the fear was connected to the fact that is this the agency with the most budget or like one of the highest budgets?
Probably so. It oversees HHS oversees the FDA, the CDC, and the NIH. So I imagine it does.
It has, if I remember correctly, it has a monstrous budget. And so to put somebody in control who is trying to essentially reduce costs, I think would upset people because they would think, well, we can't be reducing cost. We need to be, at putting more money towards it because we need more pills and we need more doctors and we need more hospitals because that's, that like you said, that's the status quo and that's the
Hmm.
solution. And anyway, yeah. What else? What else do you have for us,
Well,
Hilda?
I was thinking about Kennedy said several times too, and think about how this can upset the status quo. He said, we want, or I want, we would like to see radical transparency in this agency.
Mhm.
That's like saying, we're going to open up the blinds when there's a lot of covert stuff going. We don't all know this because we're moms and not scientists, but there have been many who've said our science is so corrupted now. You can buy and get the results you want. So I heard recently about a scientist who found out that vitamin C was good against cancer. Okay. I think it was not Linus Pauling. You may have heard of him.
Mhm.
Well, the minute he found out that this was a possibility, that vitamin C could be helpful for cancer patients, he got like all his funding removed from his research. Like nobody wanted to publish his papers. I heard that the Mayo Clinic said that they replicated his studies and didn't come up with the same result, but they didn't do it exactly as he did, giving vitamin C every day, giving a certain kind of vitamin C. They didn't do it separate from chemo and radiation treatments, which is exactly how he did it. So they didn't replicate it properly. And yet they said, oh, his study didn't prove out when we did it too, And so it's
It's
like
because there's
when
no
you
money in oranges.
that's right, that's right. And even liver and I mean, different organ meats actually have vitamin C, I
Yeah.
believe.
Spleen.
Moose
Spleen.
adrenal glands
Yeah.
have vitamin C. Anyway, I know
Yeah.
too much at this point, but
I know,
but
right?
I was like, wow, radical transparency. So again, wouldn't that be scary to people who know what goes on behind the scenes?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Any probably any large organization would be scared of radical transparency, and the government is like the biggest large organization, you know?
And that's the
Oh,
other thing he said, since you said large organization, I'll just riff off that for a minute. He said, we don't want the institution to be more important than our children's health.
mm,
And
Mhm.
I liken that to schooling where, we've got some people homeschool, some people send their kids to public school. I sent mine to public school, but I'm just mentioning this as a parallel. Sometimes, having the kids follow all the rules is more important than their actual learning. And that should never be the case, in homeschool or in the regular school, right? So we've made the institution too big where it's not really providing what we need it to provide for the American people. And so I thought that was a fabulous word. But again, that's not great for the people who don't want the jobs cut and who are like, but wait, my cousin works over there. Oh,
There was a lot said about the job cut thing.
mhm.
They were like, "Oh, can you promise that you are not going to fire a single employee?" And it's like, "How what are you gonna say about that?" Like, "No, I can't promise I'm not gonna fire somebody." Like,
I know. Yeah, they were asking a lot of him and it was hard. And I will say this too. Some senators were like, you're anti vax because you worked with the Children's Health Defense. And Kennedy stated unequivocally, I am pro vaccine. Now, I do know he's worked with Children's Health Defense. I know he's written books that have given the opposite impression. But
mhm,
my understanding is that he doesn't want to take away anyone's right to vaccinations. And he probably said that to reassure people. He wants them simply to be informed about what's in them. Some doctors don't even read the insert labels. So I
mhm.
think he said the same thing about food. He didn't make the parallel with vaccinations. So I'm going there. But he said, my boss likes to eat McDonald's. He said, he likes his Big
we all
Macs
know
and
that.
Diet Cokes. He's like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to take that away from him, but I do want him to know what's in that. So I feel like the same holds true for vaccinations. He's a threat if he dared to say he was against them. So I think he's decided to go that line. And actually, I've never heard him say he's anti vaccine, though I know he's very well aware of the dangers that can come from them. So I think it was a very fine line he had to navigate. And I'm not sure I would have done it quite like he did, but I'm hopeful that when he gets in, he will help people understand better what the ramifications are of making those choices.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought that part up because I found that to be maybe the most damning evidence against him. It felt like there was a lot of conflicting evidence on what he was saying, what he had said in the past, what he was saying currently, what he had written about. And it did sort of feel like, okay, you're being a little bit wishy washy and they're pulling podcast quotes from
I
you,
know. I was
even
like,
if
"Was
they're
that
taking them
my
out of
show?"
context. I know, right?
I know, I know. I suspect that he decided that he wanted to present it a certain way because I know that he helped Brian Hooker write that book, Vax versus Unvax, Let the Science Speak. Now, I did think it was interesting that they didn't bring up that book because I was like, that one's
Yeah, they
pretty
didn't.
obvious. But maybe it's because he would have said, catch this, all of that book is really just data about the long term consequences of vaccination. So, a kid that gets the MMR, for example, what is their health like? Okay, maybe they didn't get the measles, mumps, or rubella. But if you do a long term study, you see that their health is worse. The outcome is worse than the kid that didn't get the vaccination. So they might have like stirred up a hornet's nest if they dared to ask that. But I was surprised. I was like, I wonder why they're not asking about that book because his name was right there with Brian Hooker's on the cover and it was called
Mhm.
Vax versus Unvax. But maybe it's because it was still inconclusive. So
Mm.
I know that Kennedy, by the way, just to reassure the moms who are like, oh, I didn't like that he said he was pro vax, he will never forget. You can't forget what you know. He's not going to forget that data. He's not going to forget where he came from. You know, he used to fight big corporations who were polluting the waters with mercury.
Mhm.
He knows the consequences of all the adjuvants and such in the vaccines. He's not going to let that go, but he also has to be very wise as he moves forward because you got to play nice when you're in politics and you've got to make compromises. Some people said, "What do you think about the Maha movement now that they're talking about an mRNA vaccine, right? Developed with AI against cancer." And I'm like, that's not even Kennedy's purview. He wasn't a part of that conversation. And I think certainly there are going to be things that the new administration is going to choose that will be something that Musk doesn't like or Trump doesn't like or Kennedy doesn't like. You know, it's a whole movement and there are going to be compromises made along the way. But I still think if he gets nominated as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, he is going to move us closer to making America healthy again than if someone else were chosen in his place.
Mm. It was like 4 hour long, right? 4 hours
I know,
Yes.
is
and you literally sat there for the full
Oh,
4
yeah. I
hours?
was like, I'm not getting up to go to the bathroom.
you're
This girl
like,
near me
I'm
is like,
gonna
are you leaving? I was like, no, I'm not leaving. Are you kidding? I'm not leaving. But
like,
it
I will
was
be
hard for some
dehydrated
people.
before I walk out of here.
Yes. I had invited my friend who has an 8-month-old, like I said earlier, and she was sitting right next to Vani. But after a while, her baby was getting a little restless, and she had to get something to
Totally.
drink, and so they had to like peace out. And the next thing I knew, I turned, and someone who was not sitting next to me earlier was sitting next to me. So someone saw the space and jumped in, right?
Mhm.
And then this is a beautiful moment, I will tell you. Again, these are not things you will see on C-SPAN or CNN. I noticed that the woman was praying under her breath. It makes me want to cry to think about it because I'm a person of prayer too. But I was just like, oh my gosh, yes. And I was like praying for angels to protect Kennedy and for God to move because this is a spiritual battle. I will say, I do think this is not just flesh and blood, baby. It's not just like one senator against a nominee or one senator against another senator. Our future is at stake. And so that's why I got chills when Kennedy was like, there are no Republican children, there are no Democratic children. You know, these are all our children. And this is an existential crisis for our nation. So I was like, okay, this man is the man for our time. By the way, he did talk about prayer as well. He said, I've prayed every day that God would use me. And I'm like, look at this man. He
Mhm.
doesn't need to do this. He could, you know, stay with his beautiful wife and be doing all the falconry stuff he loves in his place in Kennebunkport or whatever it's called, you know, Massachusetts. But he's coming forth to do public service because that's kind of in his veins and it's in his heartbeat. So I'm so glad that he stepped forward and I know he didn't need to. And so I'm grateful.
Wow. got chills
I know,
just
that's
listening
really
to that as
moving.
well.
Mm. So I wanted to ask though, like the the whole time he's sitting there, the 4 hours he's sitting there the whole time, and the whole time these senators are just berating him, right? Maybe talk us through a little bit, like, the makeup of the panel that he's speaking with. Um, is there anybody that is, like, sort of team
Yes.
Kennedy, or are these all people who are there who are just, like, completely opposed or at least mostly opposed and trying to get answers?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. So it was the hearing before the Senate Finance Committee, and I think if I had to put numbers on it, I would say 2/3 were against him, 1/3 were with him.
Mm.
It was crazy. It was hard. But, I will say this, when Bernie Sanders, which you might have seen the clip and the onesie and all the
That's like
things,
the
when
going
Bernie
all around, that was
Sanders
crazy.
I know.
Mm.
So, just to give background, he had a little like poster board. My daughter's like, "What is this? A science fair?" I'm confused. But I liked it when the senators brought out poster boards because to sit there for 4 hours and try to just listen to talk is a lot, right? So some of them had quotes of Kennedy or different things they were showing. So Bernie pulled up a pair of onesies that he saw on the Children's Health Defense site, and one said like, "Not vaxxed," or "No vax, no problem," and the other one said, "Unvaxxed and unafraid." And he was like, "Are you a part of this organization that sells these onesies?" And he's like, I'm not with them anymore. Anyway, he couldn't get a rise out of Kennedy, but everyone just made the funniest memes afterwards and stuff. But what I'm trying to get at is this. When Bernie started, he literally was like, I like the platform, or at least I like the phrase, make America healthy again. And I was like, okay, there's at least that common ground. He gets the idea. But I think the issue is he thinks, just like you were saying earlier, Corey, that how we can make people healthier again is making sure they have access to all the vaccines and all the pharmaceutical drugs and all the healthcare and all the insurance they can need, not realizing that there could be another way and that we should give people options, right? So, yeah, he was very irate when his moment to shine came. Everyone was allowed by the moderator like 4 to 5 minutes. And when they weren't on camera, by the way, they're just doing different things. Some of the senators weren't even in there. And then they popped in for their 4 to 5 minutes and then they left. So that was
Oh,
really interesting to
wow.
observe.
So they're not even
Yeah,
really listening to the whole thing and really taking into
exactly.
consideration what he has to say. Oh, that's
Nope. Nope.
disappointing.
Yeah, I feel
I
like
know.
that's
It
a
really
mistake
was.
on the senator's part. If this is such a big issue
Absolutely.
for them, then they should be in there the entire time listening to everything.
You would think they would, but no, they've got their minds made up. Unless we call in. So I know it might be too late by the time this episode comes out, but we can make a difference with our voices. But the other thing I'll say is too, and one of the senators said it early on, and I believe he was on Team Kennedy. He said, it just seems like this is going to be shirts versus skins, meaning the Democrats are going to stay in their lane and the Republicans are going to come in and support Kennedy. Um, but again, I think they were forgetting that he was trying to convey, even the fact that he was there shows that he considers it a bipartisan issue,
Mhm.
that he allied himself with Trump. Like, who
Totally.
in their wildest dreams would ever
Yeah,
imagine that
never.
happening? Not me, for
Never.
sure. And here is a man too who really has been criticized a lot over the years for his stance on behalf of children, and that Children's Health Defense is a proper name for his group because they weren't just talking about vaccinations. They would talk about all kinds of
Yeah.
things like 5G and how there were sometimes 5G towers over elementary
Mhm.
schools. And so he and his team of lawyers would often sue companies to get them to roll back whatever they were rolling out without people's approval. I admire him to no end.
Yeah.
Hilda, did you have another story you wanted to share? A
Yeah,
tidbit?
share more stories.
Well, I just you people may have heard this before, but maybe not. Like it sometimes just whizzes past you, right? I know your moms are busy, and I'm like you. I don't watch every little thing because I've got other things to do. Um, but Kennedy did say in his opening statement that 10,000 ingredients, I would say chemicals, are approved in the US food supply, whereas in Europe it's like 400. And you might be like, so what difference does it make? But we're talking about preservatives, additives, colorings, things that are even go under natural flavorings that are made up in a lab. And they're wreaking havoc with our systems, even our nervous system. If you have a kid who's like super anxious all the time or kind of aggressive, it might be something that's in the diet. But we're taking it in and even serving it to our kids unaware, right? So that's, I think, what Kennedy hopes to do is not just have radical transparency in the agency he's overseeing, but help us to have more transparency in our food supply. And I think that will go far in helping us better nurture and nourish our families.
So, how did it end? Once it ended, what walk us through what happened then? What was the feeling in the room once it ended? Did you get to take a picture with him? Like, I don't know, share all of that.
I know. My dad's like, "Did you get his autograph?" I'm like, "No, dad, I did not get his autograph." Because the other thing is you don't wanna fangirl
Totally.
over people that you know, and I do feel like I know him because I've interviewed him a few times, and, he might remember me because of my hat. But anyway, he left the room one way, and the rest of us exited the
Okay.
other way. But there was literally a lot of excitement. Sayer G, Del
Mm.
Bigtree, Anna Maria Temple. I've already mentioned other folks, but people who have been in this movement for a while. Mary Holland
Oh,
was
boy.
there. The vice president of CHD was there. Zen Honeycutt, I mentioned her earlier, but it just felt like everyone was like, oh, the woman from House and Habit
Yeah.
Instagram account. Like it was all these people of very different backgrounds, by the way, some of whom they told me recently, they're like, I last voted Democratic. Like, I don't even know how I ended up here. But they are all coalescing and pulling together because of children's health. I just thought it was so fabulous. So then we went into another room. Fox and friends were there. They interviewed me and some other people. And there was a sense of excitement and of allies. Like it really felt nice. A bunch of us went over to the Heritage Foundation for lunch, and that we mixed and mingled, a bunch of us. And then the Means were there, Callie and Casey, and of course Zen, and she had her little 8-year-old daughter with her who was so sweet. So there was a lot of excitement and the feeling from veterans. They're like, oh, he's going to get nominated. And they said it because of this. They said Trump would never have let it gotten this far if it weren't for the fact that he would be nominated. In other words, if Trump thought it wouldn't succeed, he wouldn't have haven't gone to the hearing.
Mm.
And apparently the following day they had the courtesy hearing. I wasn't able to go to that. I was flying out of town, but there was a lot more friendliness and a lot more interest actually in what Kennedy was bringing to the fore. So I'm hopeful that it's going to go through, but even if it doesn't, I want to remind you all, I know you know, but all the moms listening that really the way to make America healthy again is to start in your very own
Mhm.
home. So start in your own home, just feeding your family the best you can, nourishing them as best you can. Yeah, they'll get sick and then they'll get better, and you're going to make them more resilient and more strong for tomorrow. The less you depend on pharmaceuticals and even the processed foods that are out there.
Wow. Yeah, that was going to be our final question, which was, how could you recommend moms move forward? Corey, what do you want to say about that?
Ditto.
Yeah, that about sums it up, right? Because I think a lot of people just don't know. And I'm sure your listeners do, and I'm thankful for that. But it is a road that you're choosing that may be harder in the short term. Like if you could give your kid, let's just say a Tylenol, maybe you would give your kid a Tylenol. It will reduce the fever. But from the interviews I've done on the Wise Traditions podcast, experts say you're just kicking the can down the road. In other words, the fever that needed to happen, the fight that needed to happen, let's say inside the body to have more white cells to fight the bad bacteria or whatever, got suppressed, so the body's not doing its job, and so your kid's going to get sick later with something else like maybe mono when they're 16 and right now they're 10. So if you can lay off some of those easy pills and let them have a fever and be uncomfortable and give them a little cold press and a castor oil pack or whatever you might do, a mustard press on the chest, I don't know, some alternatives, there's lots out there, they will be the better for it.
Yeah. I actually want to add to that, despite the excitement and the hopefulness over this nomination, that I don't think personally, this is my personal opinion, I don't think any political figure can save us. And that we as parents are, like both Hilda and Corey said, in charge of our family's health. And it really does start with us. And we cannot rely on these three-letter agencies to give us the accurate science. And even if they do, how is that applicable to our own families, our own children with their own unique circumstances? Um, I just, I think that we are our own best advocates for our family and our children, and we should. take that job very seriously.
Yep.
Ditto.
All right. Well,
Any last
Hilda.
fun things you want to add about the experience, Hilda, before we sign off?
Not everybody that you see on TV or on Instagram are who they seem to be in real life, but the people I've mentioned on the show are.
Mm.
You know, Ginny Urich, Vani Hari, Zen Honeycutt, Del Bigtree, Sayer G, Kennedy. I know them. I know them. And they are the real deal. So, um, while I agree with you, Christine, that these people aren't going to save us, know that they are advocates
Mm.
for your health and your children's health. That's how I see it anyway.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
It's true. My pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you, Hilda, for joining us. Can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yes. So I'm the host and producer of the Wise Traditions podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find Wise Traditions on any podcast platform. And they can also find me at Holistic Hilda, where I have courses and communities and different offerings just to help boost your health and your ancestral living ways.
Awesome. All right, everybody. That's a wrap. Um, Follow Hilda, Christine at Nourish the Littles. I'm at
Oh,
For
yeah.
Nutrient's Sake.
I'm at Holistic Hilda on Instagram. I forgot to say it. Sorry.
And the show is Modern Ancestral Mamas on Instagram. You can find the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. I don't know that whatever other platforms there might be, probably there too. So anyway, thanks for listening. That's it. See ya.
Love you guys. Bye.
Bye.